All right, welcome back. You're probably here for some BRAP, so we're going to bring it with some rotor talk. Basically walked into Mazdatrix today and found a happy surprise. One of our friends, Lucky Sevens, the owner was there dropping off a rotating assembly for balancing, and he brought in some brand new rotors he acquired from Japan, and we were delightfully surprised because for the first time in a long time, we saw a change or just a different look in what Mazda is doing with their OEM rotors. So I'm going to go over some of the small changes that we noticed with these brand new from Japan rotors. And this is really the first one that I've seen. Mazda makes slight updates occasionally, and they've done it in the past to rotors or side plates. And in this case, it looks like they changed a little bit of their machining process and modernized one of their rotors. This particular rotor is a Series 5 turbo. So it shares the same compression as a Cosmo motor, 20B motor, or FD3S motor. But the pocket itself, and I've talked about this in other videos, is actually a slightly different shape. And that's one of the ways I recognize what rotors I'm looking at, is kind of pocket identification. And so the Series 5 rotors have always carried what I call a machined and rounded pocket. It's got more of a rounded edge than your FD3S, and it's got more machining that you can see in here versus casting than the Series 4 predecessor. So very recognizable. But in this case, they don't have any of the actual granular machine marks. And I actually grabbed an earlier rotor that we can look at, and you can see there's just a lot more machine marks left in the rotor. That grooving or granular structure is very predominant. And this is actually a FD rotor, but for comparison purposes, it shows that granular structure. And so the whole face of the rotor is actually smoother. I'm very interested to spec this rotor out and see if they've made any changes to the specs of the rotor. They could have actually reduced it a little bit. And even on the side, you'll notice that like some of the modern RX-8 rotors, you're now seeing a little bit of a step. When we build race motors, we'll still end up narrowing this up more, but it looks like they now have a little bit of a factory clearance built in for your tips. Again, Mazda kind of bringing some modern performance ingenuity to their OEM rotors. This is really nice to see new machine work. The way they're balancing in their pockets is now a new and improved version. The traditional was always a circular, just a drill path, end mill path. And now you have a very uniform pocketing where the depth changes. And that's usually where Mazda is balancing the rotors themselves or matching the rotors up. I don't believe Mazda does much in the way of side-to-side balancing. It has more to do with overall balance weight and matching sets, because if you really think about it, the rotor is supported on one side and it's full of liquid oil that's moving around, so it's never going to actually be balanced in the center. That's just not physically going to happen. But when it comes to the modernization here, we've got now what looks to be laser engraving, which is kind of nice. And it does have some depth to it, so it's not just a surface engraving. The traditional was more of a stamp that they put in there. You could actually see it looked very much like a stamp. Sometimes you'd get a partial stamp. So much more predominant in the way their labeling is being done. And much more uniform and controlled. I think it looks a little prettier the way they're doing their balancing. Another thing I noticed right away was the anodizing color is different. Obviously, just modernization. Who knows? Could be cost savings, could be improvement of process. Hopefully all of the above. You never know, but it does look good. It's a little brighter of a finish than the traditional anodizing. And then you can see that they're doing hardening here on this inner land area and on the actual gear itself, which also was done on the stationary gear, but this one's damaged and kind of worn off. So continuing to harden the parts that need to be hard, and looks like maybe modernization in the machine work and in the anodizing process. We did weigh the rotor. The weight is very relative to the traditional modern Series 5 rotors. And although we were thinking, wow, maybe Mazda cast these a little lighter, that'd be cool, it really wouldn't make sense because therefore your front and rear counterweights and everything else associated with the Series 5 motor would no longer match. And obviously this is an OEM replacement part, so it still has to match all of those OEM weights. And that's one of the reasons this particular set, there's actually a pair of them that came into Mazdatrix from Lucky Sevens, is they're having Mazdatrix do high-speed race balancing, proper balancing on this rotating assembly, because it is a old eccentric shaft, old counterweights with brand new rotors. And even though this is a matched pair of rotors, they're within 8 grams, you still need to balance the rotors to your counterweights in general, and especially when it comes to a performance build, if it's going to be running high boost, high RPM, anything like that. So these particular rotors are going to actually get side cut further for better race performance and clearancing. So a lot of that beauty is going to go away and a different beauty will arrive. And then they're going to go out and get balanced to their shaft and counterweights. And then they're going to be on their way to a happy, brappy time. I just think it's really cool. It's the things we get at Mazdatrix, and I'll call this maybe a Mazdatrix corner because this really is courtesy of Mazdatrix allowing me to film this, talk about this, and we had a little benchtop discussion about this before I grabbed it and grabbed the camera, just because we all thought it was very interesting. And I think that's what I'm going to leave this conversation as, is interesting, that Mazda has kind of revised one of their OEM rotors, and maybe we can hope to see more of this. Maybe this even means some discontinued parts could come back in the future. I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but I'm happy to see Mazda making rotors still. And in some ways, whether it was a forced change, maybe manufacturing processes changed, availability change, company change, change of chemicals, I don't know, but for some reason, it's now a little prettier, and it's the same thing. So we're happy to see Mazda keeping the rotors going, keeping the brap alive. If you have questions, concerns, definitely drop those below. Hit that like button, subscribe if you like the brap. Just showing off the cool stuff that we see, and hopefully everybody else enjoys the discussions as well. So Series 5 turbo rotor out of Japan. Same weights, same specs basically, but a little bit different than your traditional rotor. I still need to check the width, but traditionally what we see with some of the modern rotors when they have this little step line right here is that they've got a thou and a half or so more clearance than the traditional rotor at the tip, which is good for your OEM application. Because even in OEM application, you can get some tip drag. But when it comes to performance, you still got to clearance some more. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not giving the specs away, but it's more because you want to make more power. All right, I'm done. That's a wrap. Back to work.